One of the big issues I've been keeping my eye on for the past 2 years is something that's very difficult to describe, but broadly speaking, it is the trend I have been able to observe that social stratification throughout society and the ability of individuals to participate in society and derive contentment, enjoyment, and pleasure from conventional social functions and conventional means of interaction, that in a general sense has been diminishing. By that I mean everyone exists on some kind of point on this bell curve of distribution of attributes, intelligence, attractiveness, looks, cognitive capacity, however you want to put it. And we're all somewhere along that line. But increasingly in society, people who occupy the mean, or even above the mean, at least in certain respects, are less and less able to participate and enjoy the fruits of conventional notions of what is considered to be acceptable or the good life. And I think this is something that people are routinely ignoring. People tend to be obsessed by race or ethnicity or perhaps gender. But one of the big issues, as I'm mentioning here, is the fact that average people, people of average cognitive capacity, people of average looks, people that just aren't very successful due to factors outside their influence, are very, very marginalized in today's state of affairs. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. In earlier times, without things like mass media, without the wide-scale ability to travel and to see things outside the purview of normal daily life, this was not much of an issue, or it was not as great an issue. There have always been divides based on intelligence and attractiveness and looks and what have you. But we are seeing something unprecedented in the current society we live in, the current civilization. One good example of this, of course, is the so-called incel community that I've talked about on occasion, where you have males that, either in terms of looks or status or however you want to put it, simply don't meet the mark by any normal criteria. Part of that has to do with the nature of dating apps and the distortion that has occurred in the mating market and dating market due to the availability of the internet and women being hypergamous, of course. But that is a good example of one very marginalized group of people. But I think it's getting worse and worse. I don't think it's limited simply to the bottom rung of people, although it might seem at the moment that that's the case. I think as time goes on, we are going to see greater and greater marginalization and greater divides between people who occupy the mean or who are even above the mean in certain respects, perhaps intelligence or even looks, and they too will be marginalized. They too will find achieving the conventional norms of contentment and what is deemed to be a good life or an acceptable life or successful life, that these will be increasingly out of reach for them too. And this is something I've been preoccupied with quite a bit, probably for the better part of 2 years. Whilst everyone else is spending their time worrying about world politics or national politics or race or ethnicity or gender and women and men, I've been looking at this issue in particular because it seems to be a serious issue. And I think it's going to get to the point where people who are even well above the mean, but not at the upper echelons, or let's say the far right of the distribution curve of looks, intelligence, success, etc., are going to be excluded from the conventional means of accessing what we regard as a good and successful life. And here's the thing. I'm the last person to say life is all about being content, life's all about being happy. No. Life does consist of struggle. It's a push and pull at the end of the day. However, I think it's a tall order indeed to require of people who are not getting the things that they psychologically and socially require to continue running on a treadmill that does not satisfy those needs, simply because it's quote-unquote the right thing to do. For all the negative talk of video games and what have you, I think we might be heading into an era that one might deem or call the era of unplugging. And there's a lot of talk of VR, virtual reality, and what have you. And in a sense, many video games are a precursor to that. Many video games allow you to be outside of reality for an extended period of time. They're more enjoyable. They offer you more and they're more satisfying in their interactions, even if it comes to social interactions. I know tons of people who run groups for World of Warcraft, and they seem to be a lot more content doing that than they otherwise would be in real life engaging in quote-unquote normal social activities. And a lot of people will deem that evil or negative or degenerate or paused or whatever. But we have to understand that if people are drawn to that, it must mean something. It must mean that some aspect of virtual reality, for lack of a better way of describing it, is actually more appealing than the alternative. And I don't think it's anyone's place to say, in lieu of that, go pursue normal social activities when this has been tried and attempted and they turn out to be not nearly as great as the alternative experiences, these, we'll call them semi-virtual reality experiences. I don't know when virtual reality will become an all-encompassing, all-consuming aspect of our lives. It might take several decades or it might take less. But I think this is the direction we are going in, because huge swaths of people of normal or middling capacity or even above average capacity in terms of intelligence, in terms of looks, are not going to have access to the things that people generations ago did have. It used to be that the best way of escaping reality was to spend money on the cinema, spend 2 hours in the cinema at best, and then leave. And for a brief period of time, you were taken away from the drudgery of your life. But these days, when everyone can see the glamour and the glory of celebrity, and beautiful people are everywhere, and you see what they have, and smart people are pushing the boundaries of wealth and success, and you are never going to do that, and you know it, then it becomes a little bit more difficult to lose yourself in the somewhat mindless and sometimes very thoughtful entertainment of the cinema. By way of contrast, this primitive virtual reality, video games primarily, and other means of entertainment on the internet, allow you to escape it in a much better way. I'm not saying that video games and the internet allow you to lead a fulfilled life by any means, but what I am saying is that these things are serving the purposes of those who avail themselves of it to a much greater degree than the conventional, normal activities would. Because most people I know have tried those things and they're failing. The incel community, as I've said, is a good example of the beginning of this, but increasingly people who wouldn't even be considered incels. They might have gotten laid on occasion, they might have had a relationship or two, and they might be able to hold down a job, are still finding the so-called American dream, in, say, in the American context, or in the more general sense, the dream of success and contentment, totally elusive in their lives. And as a consequence, I think we are going to see a drift towards unplugging, the era of unplugging. Now, you might see where I'm going with this. I am, in some sense, making a reference to Cypher from The Matrix, where Cypher, as you know, is very insistent on returning to the Matrix and this world that he's completely unaware of, that is simply a world of enjoyment, of contentment, of pleasure. I think that is what human beings increasingly are going to go for. And it's going to be a huge number of people. It's going to be perhaps even a majority of people, because the majority of people are neither hyper-intelligent nor very, very beautiful. And it's going to take a while, but I do see this as being the direction things are going in. It's no longer enough for people to stomp their feet and ring off traditional tones of, well, this is the wrong thing to do, it's degenerate, or to claim that it's corruptive and corrosive of society. Maybe all of those claims are true, maybe they're not. It's not my place to make that call. That's not something you can really use data to analyze anyway. But what I can say is that people in huge numbers that do not fit the very tail ends of the right of the bell curve on many important fronts that are required for social and human success, height, intelligence, attractiveness, looks, wealth, etc., are no longer going to gravitate to these conventional terms and norms that are demanded of them. And this is something that should concern people, because if it's the case that people are going to want to unplug in the future, almost as a default, I think that is something that should concern everybody. This might be, to my mind, a greater concern than all of the other divisions we see laid bare before us. Divisions of race, ethnicity, gender problems, because this is something that affects all groups to varying degrees. Because what it comes down to, what I'm talking about, are these huge swaths of people of all types and backgrounds that simply do not fit the mold of hyper intelligent, hyper attractive, hyper whatever, and they are marginalized in ways that few people can comprehend. And the other aspect to this is the strange thing that I've observed again and again, specifically regarding intelligence, but also regarding other things. So, for example, really dumb people typically don't know that they're really dumb, hence the Dunning-Kruger effect. And really, really smart people, and I'm not a really smart person, but I've observed really smart people. I'm somewhere in the middle. But really smart people, they don't notice it either. The really smart person looks at a paper about string theory and really comprehends it pretty well and thinks that anyone can do it. It doesn't take much effort. He doesn't relate to other people in terms of intelligence. I've also seen this on the front of attractiveness and looks. I've encountered male models that cannot fathom the problems and challenges a male of average or middling looks has, or a short male has. It's completely incomprehensible to them. And this is because people to the far end of the bell curve, they're almost in a zone that's completely locked away to other human beings because of the way the world treats them. Many of you have heard of the halo effect. Well, that's a real psychological phenomenon. And the halo effect is basically this thing that you project into the world where people look up to you. They look at you in a positive way, usually because of your looks, but it can also be because of extreme intelligence and other factors. People on the far end of the bell curve, in terms of intelligence and or looks, live essentially in a different dimension. And the complaints and struggles and challenges of normal people or above average people, gods forbid people below average, both in terms of looks and intelligence, it's simply beyond them. On the matter of intelligence, as an example, take somebody with an IQ of about 85. This is a person who might indeed struggle to read the label on an electrical appliance and understand its contents. So he might buy something like a power drill or vacuum cleaner, and he can't really read the instructions very well. A smart person wouldn't. A hyper-intelligent person certainly wouldn't. And more importantly, a hyper-intelligent person cannot fathom what that's like. A hyper-intelligent person can usually do basic addition, multiplication, and they can use these things to, say, calculate the square meters of their home, for the purposes of refurnishing the home or redesigning the home. A person with 85 IQ, he can't do that. And then we turn to the looks department. Really attractive people get everything thrown at them. Attractive women and attractive men. The world is their oyster, as it were. They have no idea, and in addition to that, no sympathy for people who are not in that situation. Of course, these are extremes, but the reality is that the extreme is becoming the norm, and I have to be really careful in phrasing this. The extreme of the bell curve is becoming the norm of what is regarded as normative for success and contentment in the world. And that was, in earlier times, not the case. Because this issue encompasses so many different angles and so many different types of people, there's no real way to take a whack at it. However, inasmuch as the internet, video games, and a future virtual reality might be some kind of semi-solution to this, I think we might want to embrace that. I've spoken to people who have fully admitted to me that if they had the choice between living the lives they have, average as they are or below average as they are, or unplugging where, say, in some hypothetical situation, they're given a tube through which they're fed, but they live in some sort of paradisical virtual reality online, they would certainly choose the latter. And it's perfectly understandable. When basic human needs are not met, and they cannot be met, people will turn to alternatives. I think, for the purposes of this discussion, we can indeed say thank the gods for the internet, thank the gods for virtual reality. I've also heard many stories of young men in particular, incels, who were managed to stave off suicide vis-a-vis video games because they were able to achieve something, say in a competitive video game or what have you. It's not all bad, and yet we tend to have a very pejorative view of these things without taking a holistic approach in understanding how we got here and what exactly the dynamics are at foot. People who can achieve have a distorted view of what's achievable because it came easy to them. Whether it's through looks or intelligence or both, they don't understand that there are people who will never attain what they've attained. And they don't understand that there are people who are so far removed from them that they might as well be a different species for all intents and purposes. And this is why the mean shall divide us. In a time in the not-too-distant future It won't be enough to be one standard deviation above the mean in terms of intelligence. It won't be enough to be a 6, or perhaps even a 7 in terms of looks, be it male or female, or especially male. You're going to have to be an 8, a 9, a 10, etc., etc. The extremes will become a norm, in a sense, in terms of what is actually actionable for people in their lives, and the rest of us will be consigned to a very dim and grim world where none of that is achievable and none of that is even remotely feasible. The alternative to that, of course, is what I've mentioned, a world of virtual reality, a world that allows you to have all these things you want in a way that is not given to you in reality. I think that is ultimately where we're heading. I think it's a matter of time, and I think it's something that people really need to think about. I don't know if there's a solution to this, as is often the case. What's the solution to this problem? What's the solution to feminism? What's the solution to divorce rates? What's the solution to this and that? Because this problem in particular is so all-encompassing and needs to be attacked from so many different angles, and it might just be the case that we have to come to terms with a quote-unquote brave new world where human beings are divided by the people who actually partake of life and enjoy it because they've been lucky enough to be given the gifts of attractiveness and intelligence, and the other people, the rest of us, who simply spend our time in a virtual reality trying to pursue the same things, albeit with much more success. Anyway, food for thought on a topic that I think is quite interesting and quite alarming simultaneously, and it's something that I don't see a lot of people talking about. Indeed, I am at this stage firmly convinced that the mean shall divide us. Until the next time, if I'm still alive, more content to come. Be well and enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.